We've seen one where developer is being paid for a lot. Fraudster impersonates the attorney for the developer, actually created a bank account in the law firm's name. Title company wires the funds, and it ended up that the account was created by the fraudster. This is a big sum of money.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 146. On the morning of August 8th, an associate of mine received an email from me asking if he'd be available to make a payment to a vendor. When he responded yes, I sent him wiring instructions to transfer $3,470 to a bank account in Rhode Island. Luckily, this associate texted me to ask what the payment was for. And that's when we both realized that someone was pretending to be me. And they had enough information about my relationship with this associate that they were able to seem convincing. Luckily, no money was transferred or lost, but I did feel it necessary to email everyone on my mailing list to let them know that this was happening and to prevent any other associates of mine from falling for this fraud. In the words of my guest today, cyber fraud is unhinged, and it's reached an epic level in real estate transactions. So this affects any of us who are buying and selling real estate. And that's why I've invited Tom Cronkright to the show today. Tom is an expert on cyber fraud, and he's even started his own company called Certified to prevent fraud in the real estate, lending, and title industries. Many of you will also recognize Tom's name because he's also the CEO of Sun Title, which serves the greater Grand Rapids, Michigan area. Tom's got some mind-blowing content to share with us today, real-time cyber fraud that he's been seeing recently and over the past year. So you definitely want to hear what Tom has to say, because if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. Tom, thank you for being on the show today.
Very glad to be on, Brian. Thanks for the invite.
Let's just start with my situation. What was going on there?
It's what I'd say a stereotypical case of what's called it's social engineering. And what social engineering is, if you take a step back and see what's happening in the cyber fraud landscape, while people are still hacking into computers and stealing information and either repurposing or monetizing that information, a lot of the activity has moved to trying to spoof or mimic or impersonate somebody and then trick somebody else into doing something that they think they're doing based on a trusted relationship or set of communications, but in fact there's a fraudster in the middle. So the components of what you're describing are really felt in nearly every industry in the country, especially real estate, in the sense that, to your point, somebody got information about you, either through social networking or social media, or they just, what are called spear phishing, they just came at you, and maybe you clicked on a phishing link or something that you thought maybe was a document you needed to review or some type of promotion or whatever. And a lot of times these fraudsters, 9 out of 10 times, it starts with somebody clicking on a link and one of two things happens. You either put your user credentials in for that account, and then they get access to that account. So let's say they take over, it's called account takeover, they take over your email. Or you click on a link and they embed a piece of software called malware, and that starts to do a number of different things, including like mirroring all your keystrokes or your activity. So, and then once they have access or they have visibility into your interaction, and you had mentioned that the person that received these communications thought they were communicating with you, that's the whole intent, is that they want to engineer this social interaction with two parties that are already communicating and already trust each other, but they want to insert themselves in the middle so that they can defraud one person or another. So in this activity in real estate is up just 80%. So this idea of what they call business email compromise is up 80% just in the last 2 quarters of this year. So when I say it's unhinged, we are hands down in the worst fraud season that we have had nationally this year alone. It's been the velocity and the sophistication of the attacks have been just next level, and we'll talk more into what's happening in real time, and hopefully what your listeners can be aware of, so that they don't get caught in the middle of a bad situation.
Yeah, very interesting. I want to give you a little bit more detail about what happened to me. It turns out that this was the only associate of mine that was actually contacted by me. And the type of relationship we have is such that it wasn't surprising that I might email him saying, hey, I need you to pay a vendor, I need you to wire some money. We had that type of relationship where that seemed plausible. The email that it came from, though, while it was under my name, it was a completely different email address. It wasn't from one of my regular email addresses. And it caused me to wonder, was it me who was compromised, or could it have been my associate who was compromised?
It could have been both. That's what's interesting, is that a lot of times you don't know. It's the weakest link that they prey on. So they could have been in the associate's account, knowing the associate is communicating with you, and then basically spoof your identity back into that account in a way that they would trust the communication. And what's interesting is we were spoofed very similarly in an attempted fraud where they had registered a domain name that looked very much like our corporate domain, Sun Title, but rather than an L, in Sun Title they used an I. And when that prints out, it prints out uppercase. So you don't see that or notice that in a lot of browsers. So what likely happened was they were in somewhere, or they wouldn't know to communicate what they did, and then they spoof you with, like I say, what looks like it's coming from you, but it's coming from an account in the control of the fraudster. Or, and it doesn't sound like this is your case, but a lot of times they'll be in somebody's account, and they create these programs where when they send to certain recipients or receive emails from certain recipients, the actual account owner never sees that because they get wheeled off into a completely different folder or automatically deleted or something like that. So it sounds like for sure somebody was compromised, and you were, I guess in your case, you were spoofed, so that they would have believed that you were communicating with you, but it ended up being the fraudster.
And when I contacted you, because I knew you were an expert in this, one of your first questions to me was it for the amount of $3,470, which is the exact amount that was being requested in the wire transfer. What is the significance of $3,470?
Nothing. I just wanted to know how far they were kind of infiltrated into the network. So it's one thing to say, hey, I'm a vendor, send me this amount, but you don't recognize that amount. But a lot of times, because we had a situation earlier this month where a lender's email was compromised, and a borrower receives what they thought were wiring instructions from the title company, but it was a fraudster. But in the email from the fraudster was the exact cash to close number that was accurate, which shows that not only were they in somebody's account, but they were able to review private information around a transaction that is accurate. And it just makes the believability, or call it the trust factor of those communications, even higher, because they're armed with information about a transaction that you would think only someone in the network of the transaction or the ecosystem of the transaction would know. That's why I asked, was it the right number? Because if it's the right number, they're certainly in somebody's account.
Yeah,
they're not just blindly trying to trick somebody into sending a random number to some random account.
Yeah, it all seemed very believable. If you don't mind, can we step back a bit, and can you give us kind of the high level overview of what exactly is going on? How did all this begin, and where's it coming from, and what's your high level perspective on it all?
My high level perspective, I think, is a combination of a few things, but the mobile phenomenon, this idea that we have signed what I call a social contract, even though we may not be aware of it, that rather than spending time together, we spend time communicating through our devices. So we end up kind of digitizing our personality and digitizing our communications and spending less time, face to face. And then you layer onto that the mobile phenomenon, and you layer onto that now more electronic documentation of commercial deals. And I'm not just saying real estate, any commercial deals. And it's this tension line between friction of doing business and security. And I think the fraudsters look at it and say, wait a second, you've got these industry participants, these transaction participants that are moving literally trillions of dollars a year between themselves, but they may never meet, like in person. And even if they do meet in person, when it comes to the payment side of the relationship or somebody activating to make a payment or a transfer of funds, they're not together in real time when that's taking place. So I think it's been more of an evolution where they have started with, I call it the Nigerian fraud scam, where, hey, my uncle dies, he left me $20 million, and if I could just get your account information, I'll dump it into your account, leave you $2 million, and then move the rest around. And while people are still falling for that, the scams have become much more sophisticated through that type of trickery and engineering, because so much more information is available on us between social media, between especially real estate. What's interesting about real estate is it's the only transaction profile in the United States where a property is being purchased and sold at the time that it's being purchased and sold. Meaning I list a property as an agent that syndicates, so the whole world knows that, let's say, Brian, I listed your property. But most importantly, if I put that under contract a couple days later, the world knows that I pended that property, meaning we're under contract. And that sends a signal to the fraud community that you have on average about 42 days to try to infiltrate that transaction and defraud a participant into doing something that they wouldn't do. So it's a long-winded answer, but I'd say that it's this pivot to the electronic communication and the conducting of commerce with so much dependency on our devices and technology that we don't have a way to verify. It's kind of that trust but verify. We've lost the ability to verify at critical points in the transaction someone's identity before we act.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. What are some examples then that you've seen in the real estate world of this type of fraud?
So on the social engineering side, so let me get into like phishing and then vishing and some other concepts that are evolving now just this past summer with so much activity and heat, I would say, on the industry. We're seeing a few vectors. On the buyer side, so a buyer needs to wire in $100,000 of their cash to close. We're seeing that 80% of all frauds in real estate target buyers. And how do I get a buyer to walk into a bank branch or open up their online banking app and put in my wiring information as a fraudster, thinking it's coming from the title company working on the transaction. So in that case, we're seeing same profile. Someone's email account is exposed. The identity is mimicked, or right from that account, the fraudulent wiring information is put into the buyer's hands, but in a way that is so convincing that the buyer just you wouldn't detect it. Any reasonable buyer just wouldn't have noticed that someone else was controlling the information stream. That loss right there was over $1 billion last year in real estate, and that's only what's reported. A lot of it goes unreported. The next level scams that we're hearing about, as you can imagine, was certified, and I'm speaking around the country on the topic because I'm a fraud victim. We'll get into that in a little bit. But it's called vishing, V-I-S-H-I-N-G. So with phishing, it's emails trying to get people's credentials. Vishing is where the fraudster actually picks up the phone and calls the person that they're trying to defraud. So this is a real life example from earlier this summer. So let's say, Brian, that I'm the title company and you're the buyer, and you're going to wire in your $100,000 of cash to close, and I call you and I impersonate the title company, and I say, hey, Brian, I'm from ABC Title. I'm calling you because there's a lot of fraud going on. I'm about ready to send you wiring information. I want to make sure you're by your computer so that you know that the ones that are going to come over in just a few minutes are the ones that you need to trust and follow. But what I do as a fraudster is I have a program that mimics a bad cell phone connection, so you're getting every other word of what I just described. So in your mind, you're thinking, God, this guy from the title company's calling, and yeah, I do have a closing, let's say in a few days, and it sounds like he was trying to communicate something about the wiring information. So the call ends. On your end, you're thinking, bad connection. Hopefully I hear back from him, and you do. So a text shows up on your phone that we just had the communication over, and the text message says, hey, sorry, this is Tom from ABC Title. I had a bad connection. I just wanted to confirm a couple things. One, I'm calling you because, so they kind of reiterated in a short text exchange, and then ultimately they email the wiring instructions after they've disarmed you from thinking that anything is awry. If anything, they're enhancing the believability that they're protecting the victim before the information is exchanged. Next level interaction that we haven't seen in the industry.
Wow, that is elaborate. I mean, they're actually faking a bad phone connection,
right,
in order to build credibility when they send you the fraudulent wire information.
Yeah, and if you think about it, you have 80-some million millennials that haven't even purchased a home that are going through this process for the first time, and they've probably never seen wiring instructions in their life, literally, right? Because they just bank differently. And why wouldn't you believe that?
If you are thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition 5 years ago, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB & Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you're expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. Are millennials typically the target of that type of vishing?
No, I'd love. Somebody asked me this the other. It was in Nashville last week. Someone asked that same question. There's no target profile, and I think it's because it's just so hard to get your hands on like really good data around, is it socioeconomic, is it regional based, is it what I tell people they're just completely agnostic. They don't care about the industry, they don't care about the brands, they don't care about the victims, they just want to get paid.
I guess the profile of the victim would be anyone who might be doing a wire transfer.
Oh, for sure. No, that for sure. Yeah, they prey on somebody that's about ready to send money somewhere else. Yeah, mm-hmm. that is the profile, because that's how they get paid.
Oh, but were you talking about the profile of the actual fraudster, the perpetrator?
Oh, they're all over the country, or all over the world, frankly. So these are guys that are running playbooks from like fully vetted fraud schemes, and that in the dark web, you know, a few years ago, the full economy, if you will, for fraud was developed. So if you and I wanted to invest in a tax fraud scheme, or we wanted to invest in a wire fraud scheme for real estate, we could just put in the money to fund a fraud anonymously and then get paid in cryptocurrency after they were successful.
Really?
All the way down
that
to,
opportunity really exists out there?
Oh, for sure.
Oh,
yeah, for sure. 100%. Yep. You can do it on a fully anonymized basis, paid in crypto, in and out.
Wow.
All the way down to, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you had talked about the phishing, the vishing, and I feel like you mentioned a third component to that as well.
Yeah, so a third component is, there's many more components. A third component that I just heard of recently is they're sending actual physical letters in the mail. And very similar to the vishing where they're doing it over the phone, they're going just completely old school, and in the letter that has, the company letterhead they're trying to mimic, and, the information about the upcoming closing or transaction is they're asking somebody to respond based on this pathway that's set out in the letter. Go to this site or put in this code and download this information, and that's the only information you can rely on. So as we move as industry participants to try to verify identity the old school way, they're moving in that direction as well. So they're not just going to say, oh, well, you figured us out, we'll go away and, help the world by solving for clean water. No, they're going to double down and say, oh, you're using the phone? We'll use the phone. You're sending letters as a failover? We'll send letters as a failover. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, wow. So, I mean, they're basically, they've got all their bases covered. There's really, how do you even know then if you're wiring to the right place, into the right account?
Yeah, there are ways to know. I mean, I can get into our solution, but I think what we all face right now is this awareness level that the industry needs to have, and the participants in the industry, buyers, sellers, lenders, title companies, agents, attorneys, all of us need to have a much higher degree of skepticism and awareness on the communications that we're receiving. My wife sent me one this morning that had a Word doc attached to it that looked like it came from Apple, and it didn't come from Apple at all. And I guarantee if she would have opened that, something bad would have happened that was embedded in that Word document. So there's things we can do. We developed a piece of technology that actually confirms identity through digital analytics, through actual device ID. And it's more of a look back where we can say, okay, this device looks like it's Brian's. What does Brian's device look like over the past, 6, 12, 18 months? And we compare your device to billions of digital records to make sure that it's authentic and it hasn't been compromised. So there's ways to do it. It's just it has to be done differently than what we've done up to this point.
Being the CEO of Sun Title, you must see this type of thing happening all the time.
All the time. The phishing and the actual fraud attempts, and we're not targeted. It's just you talk to companies around the country now that I don't know how many states we're in now with certified, but it's the same story over and over. It's constantly batting these people away and trying to, as far as we can out, see them coming and preventing it from getting too close to the walls of the organization.
So it sounds like a real tug of war between the fraudsters and those in the title industry and the lending industry to kind of outcompete each other.
Definitely. There's just too much at stake. So what's interesting about real estate is, the average wire transfer is about $200,000. And there's no block of money that's moved on behalf of an average, consumer in the United States that's bigger than that. The only other thing that comes close would be like a retirement account rollover, and that's done behind the curtain between institutions. That doesn't hit a small enterprise like a title company or a real estate brokerage. So they're focused in. I mean, cybercrime in the real estate sector is the fastest growing vector that the FBI is tracking right now. Huge problem.
What are some other examples, real world examples that you've seen recently?
Some other examples have to do with payoffs. So let's say that you're holding a land contract, or you're holding a mortgage, and the title company is going to pay you at closing, so that the new buyer and the new lender for the buyer can come in and have clear marketable title and first lien position. And what we're seeing is them, again, getting into somebody's account, and then just at the right moment, they send to the title company processing the deal fraudulent payoff information. And this is a growing trend. It'll be the topic of our next white paper in a couple weeks, of some just incredibly sophisticated payoff letters and the actual communication threads that the fraudster had with the title company on mimicking the exact payoff letter that looks identical to the original one, just swapping out the account number. We've seen one where they actually used the same ABA number as the mortgage company that was being paid off that they were trying to defraud. So we've seen one where scenario on the East Coast earlier this year, developer is being paid for a lot, okay, a residential lot. Fraudster impersonates the attorney for the developer, because the attorney was processing and managing the deal, and actually created a bank account in the law firm's name, so that when the title company received the wiring information and called that bank to confirm that the account name was in the name of the law firm, it checked out. So then the title company, this was a big sum of money, title company wires the funds to that account, and it ended up that the account was created by the fraudster, but yet was in the name of the law firm, just incorporated in a different state.
Wow.
So, yeah, really, construction, we're seeing where the construction draw process on a new build is typically 7 to 9 months, and the average draw for a construction deal is $60,000, just based on the new home prices. So we're seeing them where they infiltrate the builder's email account or the lender's email account, and then all of a sudden, draw whatever, 3, draw 5, whatever, usually in the middle of the deal. Hey, I just switched banks last month. Here's the new banking information, the sworn statement, everything looks good. Please wire the funds here. And then the bank's out whatever that draw amount was.
Wow.
I could go on and on.
Yeah,
I could talk for hours.
That is so scary. What about real estate investors who are raising funds from private investors? Have you seen a lot of fraud in that area?
I haven't seen it, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. Again, it's more just making sure that as somebody is before somebody transfers funds, that they really do verify the identity of the person and the integrity of the bank credentials that they've received.
Well, how do you do that, though? I mean, because it sounds like the fraud is just so thorough that in some cases it might seem impossible to verify.
Some of it is, some of it's not. I mean, one, I'd say certified stands in the gap of what you're just talking about, of where we stand right now, just hemorrhaging over their use of these, kind of trick and transfer techniques, I call them. But, making sure that you do your own homework or third-party attestation, I call it. So, Brian, if I think you sent me an email, do I know somebody that knows you that I know, right, that could vouch for your cell number or your email? And you got to go, I call it the triangulation. You got to, if you're not using a platform like ours, you've got to triangulate the information and spend a little more time just making sure you validate before you act. And you can do that. It just takes a bit of time.
Tell me a little bit about Certified, because you started this company to kind of fight this type of fraud. Tell us a little bit about that and how Certified actually works.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, we're fraud victims. So we got hit with $180,000 fraud in 2015, and we started to. Was
that Sun Title that got hit with that fraud?
Yeah, it was. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Commercial property deal that came in and certified check came in, ended up being a fake buyer. Guy's identity on the West Coast was stolen, and the fraudster was using that identity to go around in 5 different states and run these fraud rings. So we ended up wiring funds off that check. The check bounced, and the money disappears. So we spend 2 years recovering 140 of the 180, and I would say that was it was cheap tuition for us, because what we learned we couldn't put a price on, and that was just how incredibly connected and how sophisticated the cyber crime syndicates are. So all told, our cyber event, our wire fraud, spanned across 7 different countries, and a cast of characters that are now sitting in Florida in federal prison for multitude of money laundering and other counts. Really bad people, based mostly out of Texas and the Midwest, from what we saw.
But that's interesting, though, that it sounds like they caught the guys, and you got a good chunk of your money back.
Yeah, assuming my time is worth 0 and the attorneys worked for free. Yes, I did.
I'm impressed that you got any of that back and were able to catch the guys. So congratulations on getting that far.
No, thank you. That was the spring of 15, and then by the fall of 16, we had a borrower that was closing, a buyer that was closing on a transaction that we were helping with at Sun Title, and he went to a financial institution in Grand Haven, Michigan, here on the shores of Lake Michigan, and he was holding what he thought were title, wiring instructions that came from Sun Title, and in fact, the fraudster had inserted them in his hands. And when we unpacked that, it was like 41 minutes of velocity that this fraudster had inserted themselves in all these different accounts and communications to trick this buyer into believing that this is what he should follow. So we were left with this need to solve for 2 things if we were going to even come close to preventing another fraud event. And one was, how can I confirm identity in real time with people that I haven't met, right, and people I may never meet? And then secondly, once I have that identity confirmed, how could I use a platform to securely share and receive wiring information? So what was funny is not funny. We thought, let's just go out and buy a piece of technology, we'll insert it into our workflow, off we go. And there just wasn't anything that had been built. So what Certified does is Certified confirms through billions of records that we've aligned ourselves with some of the largest data providers in the world. It's a decisioning engine that says, look, I'm gonna look at all these different attributes from a device, right? So from Brian's device, I can look at the geolocation and all these different vectors and velocity of use, and I can say, okay, am I comfortable that this is his device, Brian, this is your device, and your device hasn't been compromised? And then we go through and we ask some questions that only you would know, and then once we've confirmed your physical identity, we use some token-based technology, and then we share this critical information. It doesn't take long. For an enterprise, it takes less than 60 seconds. For the end user, buyers, sellers, people getting paid off or wiring money in, it's about 30 seconds. And then we took it a step further, and we were able to actually get an insurance policy that allows us to guarantee each wire up to $500,000 per transfer. And this is the first time in the industry that there's ever been any protection on ACH or wire transfers ever in the U.S. Certainly anything facing Main Street. So we're in market right now. I can tell you that just by stats from the end of last month, we picked up devices in 25 different countries. We flagged over 35 million in wires that were what we call high risk or potentially high risk transfers or profiles. We've guaranteed over just under $500 million in successful transfers. Think of it as taking all of this kind of tip of the spear, cutting edge information and analytics and putting into a simple to use solution that truly does confirm identity at the point where you need to confirm it. That's the thing.
Yeah, I closed a transaction through Sun Title over the summer, and I went through the certified process, and it was pretty thorough. It asked me some questions that only I would know, but I had to think really hard to even be able to answer them. Luckily, I got the right answer, but yeah, it is a very thorough process.
Yeah, well, it's meant to be, and it's not meant to just be one of these, hey, this is super easy. It's meant to say, hey, I've got Brian here, and before I'm assuming you were receiving funds from a closing. Likely that's what I was doing. Yeah, and even though we probably met in person with my staff, we will not wire out without using certified, even if somebody's in front of us with 5 forms of ID and passports, and it doesn't matter. We have to. The solution has been optimized that it's so much more accurate than what we're carrying in our handbags or our wallets.
Now, is certified, is it an institutional solution that only institutions use, or is the private real estate investor out there, do they have opportunity to use it as well?
It's an enterprise solution from an account perspective, but what I would say to the real estate investors is this is something that whoever your title and escrow provider is, they just have to implement the solution for your behalf, period. And I say that because there's litigation pending around the country because there's been so much loss. And when there is a loss in a transaction right now, there's a recent decision in Kansas, federal decision, where people are being held liable if somebody else in a transaction loses funds, if they don't do whatever they need to or should be doing to educate and try to prevent the loss from taking place. So what I would say to them is if they're in the regular business of sending and receiving funds, yes, we could onboard them as enterprise. But I think more importantly, the lenders and the title providers that they're using, they just need to implement the solution. There's just no reason not to. It's too risky a landscape right now. And if the deal doesn't close, even the investor, even though, hey, this wasn't my fault, this was the buyer that lost funds, I can point to cases where they were named in lawsuits and they're still pending. I don't know where it all is going to end up, but
so beyond the enterprise solution, what can individual investors do to protect themselves?
I think the first thing is look at the email accounts that you're using, and you have to turn on what's called two-factor authentication. So if you're using Gmail or AOL or Hotmail or whatever it happens to be, there's a setting in your profile where you can turn on what's called two-factor authentication. And what that means is to get into your email, I know it's a pain, there's some friction here, but it'll stop probably north of 80% of all account takeover. So that when you go to access your email account, you will be given a code, and you got to put in the code, and then it unlocks the email. But you have to do that every time you interact with your email. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that looking, not using public Wi-Fi or even how your home network is connected to make sure that it is secured and that you don't have all these, they call it the Internet of Things. They have dishwashers and ranges now and coffee pots. Everything's connected to the Internet. Well, we were in a conference in D.C., and they showed that a hacker hacks into a coffee pot, hacks into the home router, and then they call it island hopping. Once they were in the home router, they got the credentials for the enterprise server, and they were into the enterprise server for where this person worked. Just super bad. So I would say two-factor authentication, lock your home down. If you're going to connect stuff, connect it on a dummy guest network that doesn't go anywhere, and get a really good router at home, like an enterprise router that's secure. The other thing is just virus. You got to have not free, but truly robust virus detection on your devices, and some type of email filtering like Mimecast or something similar to that. And beyond that is more education, just educate the family, just like my wife this morning. She sent me that. Did you buy something or upgrade something on Apple? No. It's a scam. Thanks for not opening it. That's a training. I talk to her all the time. Don't open anything. Just send it over. So those are the types of things. And then if you're receiving information and something looks odd or some key words to pick out right now, the word kindly, if you see the word kindly, it's probably definitely fraud. And it seems simple, but we don't use the word here in America. It's an English term, right? We'd say, hey, please, or could you, or whatever. Kindly, lowercase i's. So, I just sent this, or whatever. And then one of the other big things is if somebody is asking you to confirm that you sent a wire and what time it was sent, you got to stand on the brakes. Because institutions, especially even like ours, hey, here's the wiring instructions. Your wire is, your closing's Friday, and as long as you get it to me by the end of the day Thursday, I'm good. I'm not going to ask you again. But they continually say, can you let me know when and, what day and what time you'll initiate the wire, or send me the wire confirmation. If there's any of that like proof in real time that they're requesting, or if anything changes, so this is new wiring information, or here's an updated set of wiring instructions, the probability of a large corporation switching banks during the middle of a transaction is really, really low. It'd be like switching, I don't know, lawyers or insurance companies. I mean, this is a Herculean effort. So those are some of the kind of key watch outs. And then I think the other is just having an honest conversation with the people that you normally do business with, your lenders, your title providers, your attorneys, and saying, look, how are you keeping me safe? How are you storing and transmitting information that you're expecting me to rely on or give you? Because we educate now around the country that it's an ecosystem level conversation. Because if the lowest or the less secure link gets breached, it exposes the entire chain, and we've seen that over and over again.
Are there any final thoughts, anything else you want to put out there regarding this type of fraud for our listeners? What
I would say is it's unfortunate. It's not going to go away. Whatever we're reading about, I continue to learn. It's about 100 times worse, and it's moving so quickly. But what I would say is, like I say, just make sure that you're aligning yourself. You've done the steps that you need to. You continue to invest in those, because this is a journey. There's no destination where you can say, oh, I downloaded an antivirus. I'm now completely secure. And I've been told that from a lender that was completely compromised. They're saying, no, I have antivirus. There's no way. Well, that's one component of it. And I just think making sure that you stay in tune and stay aware of where things are headed. But I don't have a silver bullet to hand out. Unfortunately, this is the path that we find ourselves on, all of us as industry participants. If anyone listening is interested in Certified, what would be a good way for them to learn more? Yeah, you go to certified.com. So CERTFID.com, and or you can reach out to me at tom@certified.com. I'd love to have a conversation, and especially if you have a relationship with a title provider that you'd like me to introduce this to, within 20 minutes I could take them through and show them exactly where it fits in the workflow and how easy it is to use. But no, thank you for that. I'd love to have a conversation. And of course, if you're in the West Michigan area and you need a title company, Sun Title is using Certified. So you guys seem to have that part covered. 100%, as is many around the country. So happy to, but we're not keeping that exclusive here. But yes, if you're looking for somebody that's got this thing wrapped, we do title insurance too. Two separate companies, but we're operating both. Well, Tom, thanks so much for taking the time to tell us about this type of cyber fraud. I mean, it's a scary, scary thing, and I think your efforts to help fight it and combat it through Certified are a great thing you're doing. And I wish you the best of luck, and thanks so much for sharing this information. Yes, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it.
This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB & Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.